In the halls of the Alpha King's palace, piercing screams echo without end. The raw, relentless cries of two newborn princes left behind by their mother. They say the queen fled with her lover, leaving the Alpha King shattered and her sons inconsolable. And now the heirs to the kingdom reject every attempt at comfort. Every nursemaid fails. All healers are dismissed. Until Liora, a wolfless, orphaned servant mocked for lacking what every shifter is born with. She was never meant to touch royal blood. Yet when desperation drives her to the prince's side, something forbidden awakens. The crying stops. The princes grow calm in her arms. They cling to her scent and refuse all others. So, the court is forced to confront an unsettling question. What kind of bond forms before words, before choice, strong enough to tie the fate of two alpha princes to a wolfless servant girl? And how will the Alpha King react when he discovers his sons will not give up their lowly servant? But here's what no one knows yet. There's a secret buried so deep that even Liora herself has no idea. A secret that will change everything you think you know about this story. Young Liora stood elbow-deep in dishwater so filthy it had turned the color of old meat. Chef Grimwald wouldn't accept it until he could see his reflection in the bottom. Around her, the evening shift wound down in its usual chaos. Well-dressed house servants swept in with silver platters barely scraped, their fine livery somehow making the waste they carried seem almost noble. They heaved the platters into Leora's sink without so much as a glance in her direction. A wave of dirty water hit her square in the chest. Liora gasped, stumbling back as chunks of fat and gristle clung to her already stained apron. She looked up instinctively, some small, stupid part of her still expecting an apology. But the servant was already turning away, laughing at something his companion had said. "Hear those pups from the East Wing now, non-stop. The king hasn't slept in." "Shh, not here." They disappeared through the doorway as Liora exhaled slowly and returned to her pot. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people, you know exactly what Liora felt in that moment. That particular kind of loneliness that comes from being seen but never truly noticed. One day, she whispered to herself, one day, everyone else will see what he saw in you. Who are you talking to? The voice cut across the kitchen, and Leora's stomach dropped. She turned to find Tilda standing in the doorway, her clean apron spotless in a way Leora's never was. At 10, Tilda was 2 years younger than Liora, but she had a wolf. That made all the difference. "No one," Liora said quickly. She kept her eyes on the pot in her hands, scrubbing harder, even though the copper already gleamed. "Don't react. Don't give them the satisfaction." The apple core hit her temple hard enough to make her vision blur. She flinched, her hands jerking in the water, and the pot slipped from her grip and landed with a tremendous splash. More laughter. Not just the kids now. Some of the scullery maids had turned to watch. "Oi!" Chef Grimwald's voice boomed across the kitchen. "Clean yourself up and get out of my kitchen, runt. You're dripping all over my floor." "Yes, chef," Liora whispered. She grabbed the rag. It reeked of onions and something sour, and she fled. Low, bitter laughter followed her into the corridor until her bedroom. Well, bedroom was a big word. It had been a storage cupboard once, and there was space enough for a thin straw mat. Liora pulled the door shut behind her and stood in the darkness. From somewhere far above, muffled by stone and distance, came that sound again, thin and wavering, the crying. It never stopped, not really. Sometimes it faded enough that you could almost forget it, but then it would surge back, piercing and relentless, a reminder that something in the palace was broken beyond anyone's ability to fix. There's something about hearing a baby cry that reaches into the deepest part of your soul. It triggers an ancient instinct to protect, to comfort, to make it stop. Now imagine hearing that cry every hour of every day for weeks. Imagine knowing you can do nothing about it. Liora sank down onto her mat and wrapped her arms around her knees. And as always, when she needed comfort, she thought of him. Of the Alpha King Aldrich. She closed her eyes and remembered. She'd been small, 5, maybe 6 years old, and somehow she'd gotten lost in the palace gardens. And then he'd appeared, tall and golden in the afternoon light, dressed in hunting leathers. He'd knelt down in the grass beside her, and his voice had been so kind. "What's this?" A little lost lamb. He'd scooped her up like she weighed nothing, settling her against his chest, and carried her all the way back to the kitchens himself. She remembered the way Marta's face had gone white when she saw who was carrying Liora, the way Aldrich had smiled and said something about keeping her safe, about finding her a place here despite her condition. Even then, Liora had known what he meant, despite the fact that she had no wolf. "The king saved you," Liora whispered into the darkness. "The king saved you." It was proof. Proof that she wasn't worthless. No matter what the others said, if a king could see value in her, then maybe she wasn't nothing. How many of us have held on to a single moment of kindness like a life raft? Built our entire sense of worth around one person's fleeting attention? It's a dangerous thing. Placing all your hope in someone who barely knows you exist. Her thoughts drifted, unbidden, to the crisis that had consumed the palace for weeks now. Queen Seraphina had left. The Alpha King's own mate had abandoned him and their pups. Some said she'd taken a lover. Leora's hands curled into fists. How could she? How could anyone abandon King Aldrich and those poor babies left motherless? The crying seemed louder suddenly. Or perhaps Liora was simply more aware of it. How could she do that to such a good man? Liora whispered to the walls. And to her babies. No answer came. There never was one. Today, Marta was on breakfast duty. Liora felt it the moment she stepped into the kitchen, the way the other servants kept their distance. Marta had that effect. She didn't raise her voice. She simply had a way of looking at people that made them remember their manners. 2 kitchen maids stood nearby, pretending to chop vegetables, but clearly more interested in gossip. "My sister works in the family wing." One was saying she says it's driving everyone mad. The nursemaids are taking shifts now, 4 hours at a time, because any longer and they start weeping themselves. The conversation died, but not before Liora caught the tail end. No mother to soothe them. What do they expect? "You're late," Marta said without looking up. "Wash your hands." Liora obeyed. A ball of dough waited for her, and she sank her hands into it gratefully. The crying was fainter here. The world was bearable. Then the door slammed open. A woman in a nursemaid's uniform came stumbling into the kitchen, her cap askew. "Marta," the woman gasped. "Marta, please, you have to help me." Marta set down her dough and wiped her hands on her apron. "Catch your breath, Helena." But Helena didn't catch her breath. "The princes," she said, her voice cracking. "They won't stop screaming. We've tried everything, but they just keep crying and nothing calms them. They're still at it. 4 weeks now since the queen left." "Quiet," Marta snapped. She turned back to Helena and gripped the woman's shoulders. "What do you need?" "You're still nursing, aren't you?" Helena's hands clutched at Marta's sleeves. "Please, we need someone to try. The wet nurses have all failed. The king is furious. He's threatening to dismiss the entire staff if we can't." Marta's jaw tightened. "I'll come." As Marta turned back to the counter, Liora felt something cold and heavy settle in her stomach. The pleasant morning was over. Marta would leave and Liora would be alone again. "Unless... Can I come?" The words were out before Liora could stop them. Marta turned, one eyebrow raised. "What? Can I come with you?" "I can help. I can fetch things if you need them. Clean cloths or water or whatever the babies need." Marta studied her for a long moment. "She can carry my supplies," Helena said. "But we need to hurry, please." Marta sighed. "Fine, but you stay quiet and you don't touch anything unless I tell you to." They left the kitchen at a near run, following Helena through the servants' corridors and up 3 flights of stairs to the family wing. Liora had never been this deep into the palace before. The halls were wider here, the floors polished marble instead of rough stone. But she barely noticed, because with every step they took toward the royal nursery, the crying got louder. It wasn't normal fussing. This was something else, raw and desperate and utterly inconsolable. The sound crawled under Leora's skin and settled in her bones. By the time they reached the nursery door, Leora's hands were trembling. Helena pushed the door open. Two cradles sat in the center of an otherwise beautiful room, carved from dark wood, draped with silk. And in those cradles, two tiny bodies writhed and screamed with raw desperation. Three nursemaids huddled near the window, their faces haggard. They barely looked up when Marta entered. "They've been fed," one of them said dully. "Changed, burped, rocked. Nothing works." 4 hours, another nursemaid added, her eyes red-rimmed. 4 hours, and then someone else takes over. Any longer, and you start hearing them, even when they're quiet. Marta moved to the nearest cradle without a word. She lifted one of the babies, small, red-faced, his little fists flailing, and settled him against her chest. "Shh," she murmured, swaying gently. "Hush now, little prince." The baby screamed louder. Marta tried to nurse him. He turned his face away, wailing. She tried rocking him, singing to him. Nothing changed. In the other cradle, his brother shrieked in harmony. Liora's feet moved without permission. She crossed the room in a daze. She reached the second cradle and looked down at the tiny, furious creature inside. His whole body shook with the force of his cries. So Liora reached into the cradle and laid her hand on the baby's heaving chest. He went still. His eyes popped open, wide and dark and startled. He stared up at Liora as if he'd never seen another person before in his short life. She didn't think. She simply opened her mouth and sang. It was the lullaby Marta had sung to her when she was small, the only song Liora knew all the way through. Her voice was thin and unpracticed, but the baby's breathing slowed. His tiny fist uncurled and reached for her finger, and in the cradle behind her, the second twin's screaming stopped. "How?" Helena began, but she couldn't seem to finish the question. For the first time in 4 weeks, the royal nursery was completely, impossibly still. Have you ever experienced a moment where everything just clicked into place? Where suddenly you knew exactly where you belonged? That's what Liora felt in that silence. A sense of purpose so strong it almost hurt. The nursery had gone so quiet that Liora could hear the clock ticking on the mantel. At last, Helena breathed, then louder. "You're charmed, girl." One of the other nursemaids stepped closer. 4 weeks we've tried everything. Wet nurses, rocking songs. Nothing. And you just walk in and... Liora barely heard them. She couldn't look away from the twins. From Caden's long lashes casting shadows on his round cheeks, from Ronan's rosebud mouth slack in sleep, they loved her. She could tell. These perfect, royal, utterly precious things loved her without condition, without judgment. For the first time since the king had carried her from the garden all those years ago, Liora felt chosen. "Can you bring her back tomorrow morning?" Helena said to Marta. "Please." Marta's gaze was fixed on Liora, her expression unreadable. "Yes," she said finally. "We'll come back." And 1 year passed like water through cupped hands. 1 year of following Marta through the servants' passages 3 times a day, of slipping into the royal nursery like a secret. Helena and Marta had tried to guard Liora's involvement carefully. The other nursemaids were sworn to silence. But after a year, whispers followed Liora wherever she went. The king himself couldn't calm them. A servant once said, "But a wolfless kitchen girl can." "I heard they scream the moment she leaves the room," his friend replied. "Unnatural. That's what it is." No one could explain why 2 royal princes would yearn for a nobody, a nothing, a girl without even a wolf. Though Liora didn't care about the whispers. The king had saved her once, given her a place in his palace, and now his sons needed her, chose her. She had Caden and Ronan, and they had her. The morning sun was just cresting the eastern towers when Liora and Marta slipped into the nursery. The moment the door opened, 2 small heads popped up from their shared crib. Caden saw her first. His whole face lit up and he let out a shriek of pure joy, bouncing and slapping his hands against the crib rail. Ronan joined in immediately, jumping and babbling excitedly. Leora's heart swelled so suddenly it hurt. "Good morning, my little terrors," she said, rushing across the room. She leaned over the crib rail and pressed kisses to the tops of both their heads. First Caden, then Ronan. Behind her, Marta tutted disapprovingly. Caden grabbed a fistful of her hair while Ronan tried to climb the crib rail to get to her. The moment she had them in her arms, they went soft and content. She caught a glimpse of Marta watching from the doorway, her expression fond but deeply troubled. Liora set the twins down on the thick rug and began the morning routine, wiping faces, wrestling them into fresh tunics while they wiggled and squirmed. All the while, she sang to them. The twins babbled along in their own language, making sounds that almost resembled words. Behind them, Marta moved quietly through the room, tidying and organizing. After breakfast came playtime. The twins wanted to climb on Liora to play their version of peekaboo. She obliged, of course. She always obliged. When she finally captured them both and pulled them into her lap, they went willingly, settling against her like puppies seeking warmth. Within minutes, both of them were drowsy. Liora held them close and hummed softly, rocking slightly. This was her favorite part, when they were sleepy and content, when their whole world had narrowed down to her arms. She had never felt so needed, so utterly, completely loved, and she couldn't help but think, the king must know. Maybe he would come to see for himself. Maybe he would recognize her and understand that she was meant to care for his sons. Maybe he would smile at her the way he had in the garden. "We need to talk," Marta said quietly. They stepped out into the corridor, leaving the door cracked. "You're too familiar with the young princes," Marta said. "You forget your place." "I know my place. It's by their side because they need me," Liora said, defensive. "No one else can calm them." "I know, but that doesn't change what you are." "What they are." Marta gripped Leora's shoulders. "You are a servant. They are princes. If the king finds out how attached you've become, there will be hell to pay." Liora pulled away. "His Majesty would be pleased that his sons are so well loved. He's so kind. He saved me once. He'd understand." "Liora." Marta's voice held a warning. "Think about what you're saying. They need me. I'm special. Maybe this is why the king saved me." Marta stared at her for a long moment. "You think the king will welcome you? Give you a place of honor?" Marta shook her head slowly. "Those pups will grow. And where will that leave you? Heartbroken. Cast aside. Or worse." "You don't know that," Liora said. "You are a servant, Liora. Never forget it." Marta turned and walked back into the nursery, leaving Liora alone. But Liora couldn't bring herself to believe it, because deep down she'd been harboring a dream. She wanted the king to discover them, wanted him to see her with his sons, see how much they loved her so that he would love her too. He'd saved her once before. Surely he would understand. Here's something important to understand about hope. Sometimes it protects us, and sometimes it blinds us to dangers we should see coming. 3 weeks later, it was an ordinary morning. Liora had dressed the twins in matching outfits, and they'd promptly undone all her work by crawling away the moment she set them down. "Caden, come back here." He squealed and crawled faster. Liora lunged for him, and he shrieked with laughter. Ronan, seeing his brother captured, crawled over at top speed, reaching for Liora with both hands. "Got you," Liora gasped, laughing. "Got you, my little monsters." The double doors to the nursery slammed open, and the laughter died in Leora's throat. King Aldrich stood in the doorway, tall and golden and impossibly handsome, but his eyes were fixed on her with a look of such rage, such utter revulsion that Liora felt her stomach drop through the floor. The twins, sensing the change in atmosphere, went still. "Let my children go." The king's voice was very quiet now. The king moved so fast, Liora didn't have time to react. He grabbed one of the twins' cribs and hurled it across the room. It hit the far wall with a deafening crash, splintering into pieces. The twins shrieked. They clung to Liora with desperate strength, their small bodies trembling violently, their screams high and terrified. Caden buried his face in her neck. Ronan's fingernails dug into her arm hard enough to draw blood. Liora wrapped her arms around them instinctively, staring at the king in absolute incomprehension. Why was he so angry? Was he under some kind of spell? The nursery doors burst open and Marta and Helena came running in. The king whirled on them. "Why?" he bellowed. Does this servant child have her filthy hands all over my sons? The twins were sobbing now, their small bodies heaving with each breath. Liora barely heard them. This was all wrong. What was her king saying? She pushed herself to standing on shaking legs, the twins still clinging to her. "Your Majesty," Liora said, "please try to understand. Your sons need me." His attention snapped back to her. The look in his eyes, cold, vicious, utterly devoid of warmth, froze the blood in her veins. "Need you?" His voice was soft now, worse than the shouting. "Why would the heirs to my throne need you?" He took a step toward her, and she instinctively backed up. "You are nothing. Less than nothing. You're a servant and a wolfless one at that," he snapped. "So get your filthy hands off my sons." Marta and Helena seemed to snap out of their paralysis. "Sire," Marta said, "the girl does have a sort of affinity with the children. I'll make sure she remembers her place. But perhaps—" "Get her out of here," the king roared. His scent, sour and angry, the scent of an enraged alpha, was stifling. "If I see her, even look at my boys again, I'll have her whipped in the courtyard," he said, "and thrown from the palace to die in the woods like the worthless thing she is." Leora's knees gave out. She collapsed to the floor, the twins still clinging to her, and the sob that tore from her chest was animal in its rawness. "No!" she gasped. "Please, please, I'll only come at night." "Liora," Marta's hand closed on her elbow, trying to pull her up. "Come now." Helena took her other arm, and together they tried to lift her, but Liora couldn't make her legs work. "No," she sobbed. The king strode forward and grabbed the twins by their collars, yanking them away from Liora with such force that Caden nearly fell. The boys screamed, high, terrified wails that cut through Liora like knives. "Please." Liora reached for them desperately, but Marta and Helena had her arms now, pulling her backward. The twins fought their father's grip, their little bodies thrashing, their arms stretched out toward Liora. They were crying so hard they could barely breathe. Then the doors closed, and the sound became muffled, distant. But it didn't stop. There is a specific kind of heartbreak that comes from discovering someone you trusted completely was never who you thought they were. It doesn't just break your heart. It makes you question everything you ever believed about yourself. Liora curled onto her side, pulling her knees to her chest, and sobbed into her hands. Distantly, she felt Marta's rough palm against her hair. "I tried to warn you, child," she said. "They were never yours. The words should have hurt, should have cut. But Liora couldn't process them. I don't understand," she wailed. "Why was he so angry? I was helping them. They were happy. I made them happy." "Liora, maybe if I wrote him a letter to explain." Marta's hand stilled in her hair. "Child, no, you cannot. Or maybe I could wait until he's calmer and then go to him and remind him. Remind him that he saved me once in the gardens. Remember when I was little? Liora, listen to me." But Liora couldn't stop, the words spilling out faster now. "It's because the queen left, isn't it? He's upset about his mate leaving, and he saw me with his sons and it reminded him, and that's why he was so angry. It has to be, because he's a good man, Marta. You know he is. He wouldn't hurt me on purpose. He gave me a home, so if I just wait until he's feeling better, until he's not so upset about Queen Seraphina, then I can explain properly and he'll understand and he'll let me see them again." "No." Marta's voice was firm now, almost harsh. "No, Liora, he won't. But he has to." Liora sat up suddenly, tears streaming down her face. "The twins need me. Did you hear them? They were so scared and they wanted me." She dissolved into fresh sobs, her whole body shaking. In that beautiful nursery, 2 babies were crying for her right now, and she wasn't allowed to go to them. So there had to be a way to fix this. There had to be. 3 days had passed since the king had thrown Liora from the nursery, and the twins' screams had become part of the palace's architecture. Liora stood at the washing basin in the kitchen, her hands raw and wrinkled in the cold water. Why doesn't she just go to them? Someone whispered behind her, one of the scullery maids, probably. "Shh, Another voice hissed back. Leora's vision blurred. At least Marta and Helena hadn't told anyone what had really happened in the nursery. The other servants knew only that Liora had been caring for the princes and was now forbidden from seeing them. They didn't know about the shattered crib, the king's rage, the terrible things he'd said. They didn't know that he'd called her nothing. Leora's hands stilled in the water. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. The king had been so angry, angrier than seemed possible for someone who was good and kind. He'd looked at her like she was vermin, but all she'd done was love his children. All she'd done was make them happy. There had to be a reason, some explanation she was missing. He'd been upset about something else, about the queen leaving, and he'd taken it out on her because she was there. Or maybe he'd been trying to protect her somehow. Liora. Chef Grimwald's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. That pot is clean. Move on to the next one. Yes, chef, she whispered. Liora was just turning toward the corridor that led to her room when the kitchen door burst open. Have you heard the news? A footman said, stumbling in. Word from the north. Queen Seraphina. She lives. She's raised an army. She's declared war to reclaim her sons. The kitchen exploded into shocked murmurs. Liora felt the words hit her like cold water. Through the sudden cacophony of voices, the twins' crying seemed to cut through even louder, more urgent, more desperate, as if they somehow knew. King Aldrich has declared Queen Seraphina a traitor, the footman continued. The whole palace is on lockdown, no one in or out until further notice. The murmurs died. The weight of that announcement settled over them like a physical thing. They were trapped in a palace under siege with two inconsolable infants whose mother was coming to claim them by force. Liora lay on her thin mat in the darkness that evening, staring at the ceiling she couldn't see. She thought about Caden and Ronan alone in that nursery. Were there nursemaids with them? Was anyone holding them? Or were they just lying in their new crib, exhausted and terrified, crying themselves hoarse? I could help them, Liora thought desperately. Just for a little while. She sat up slowly, her heart starting to pound. It wasn't just for her. It wasn't even just for the twins. The whole palace was on edge. Surely the king would understand that. Surely he'd see that she was trying to help. Her feet were moving before she'd made a conscious decision. Sometimes, we convince ourselves that love justifies any risk. That if we just care enough, the consequences won't matter. It's a beautiful lie we tell ourselves right before everything falls apart. The nursery was dimly lit by a single lamp. When Liora eased the door open, the crying hit her like a wave. Louder here, more immediate, more desperate than she'd heard it in 3 days. The twins were in a new crib, hastily constructed, not nearly as fine as the one the king had destroyed. The moment they saw her, they threw themselves against the bars, reaching for her with both hands, their faces red and raw and streaming with tears. They'd been left alone. There were no nursemaids in sight, no one to hold them or comfort them or even sit with them while they cried. Leora's heart cracked. Oh, little ones, she breathed, rushing across the room. She gathered them both into her arms, heavier now, solid and warm and trembling, and they clung to her with desperate strength. They pressed their faces into her shoulders and neck and made small, broken sounds that were somehow worse than the screaming. Hush, she murmured, rocking them gently. Hush now. The crying stopped. The twins sagged against her, their little bodies going limp with exhaustion. Within moments, their breathing had evened out. They were asleep, truly deeply asleep, for probably the first time in a long time. Liora held them close, tears streaming down her own face. She knew she shouldn't linger. She'd done what she came to do. The twins were calm and sleeping. She should leave now before. I warned you. Liora spun around, her heart stopping. King Aldrich stood in the doorway, 2 palace guards flanking him. His rage wasn't explosive like before. Now it was cold, controlled. Surely you can see, Liora said desperately. I can help them. Take her, the king said to the guards. Rough hands seized Leora's arms while others seized the twins. They dragged her toward the door. Behind her, the twins stirred and began to cry again, frightened, confused sounds. Please, Liora twisted in the guard's grip, trying to see the twins one last time, but they were already pulling her into the corridor. The dungeon was cold and dark and smelled of mold and old fear. The guards threw Liora into a cell without ceremony. "The king has given his order," he said flatly. "You'll be hanged for treason at dawn." A sound escaped her throat. She was 13 years old. She'd only ever wanted to help, to love, to be loved. How was that treason? Liora crawled to the corner of the cell and curled onto her side. All along she'd been wrong. The king had never been kind. He'd never saved her. She'd built an entire fantasy around a man who didn't exist, and now she was going to die for it. At some point, the raw terror had dulled into something more manageable, a hollow, numb acceptance. Liora was going to die. That was simply a fact. Now she sat with her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, waiting. Then came the soft padding and tiny whimpers. Leora's head snapped up. She crawled forward toward the bars. As she reached them, two small shapes appeared in the dim torchlight. Wolf pups, tiny, fluffy, stumbling on legs that seemed too big for their bodies. Their fur was dark, and they couldn't have been larger than house cats. Leora's breath caught. "Caden," she whispered. "Ronan, what happened to you?" The pups saw her face, and their whimpering transformed into excited yips. They tumbled over each other to reach her, their little paws skidding on the stone floor. Caden pressed his small nose through the bars and began licking at her fingers. Ronan crowded in beside him, trying to wedge his entire head between the bars. A tear tracked down Leora's cheek. They'd shifted, but they were far too young. Impossibly young. Even Liora knew that children didn't shift until 8 or 9 years old. The earliest she'd ever heard of was 4. The twins weren't even 2. "You were too stressed, weren't you?" Liora murmured. Ronan tried to climb through the bars, his chubby puppy body getting stuck halfway. Despite everything, Liora felt a laugh bubble up. "You're ridiculous," she told them. "Both of you." Caden's nose twitched. He'd caught a scent across the corridor. He launched himself toward it, made it 3 steps. Then his legs tangled, and he tumbled snout over tail across the floor. Ronan bounded after him, tripped over his own paws, and crashed directly into him. Both pups went rolling, fetching up against a tall stool. Leora's heart leaped. There, on top of that stool, something metal gleaming in the torchlight. Keys, and beside the stool, what had attracted Caden? A crust of bread. "The bread!" Liora called frantically. "Get the bread!" Both pups lunged for it. They began a spirited tug of war, tumbling sideways and crashing into the stool leg. The stool wobbled. "Yes!" Again. Liora encouraged desperately, but the pups had already forgotten the bread, wrestling and yipping instead. Liora made a high-pitched squeaking sound. Both pups froze and looked at her. "Come here," she called. They started toward her, but Caden got distracted by his own tail. Ronan stuck his nose in a crack in the floor. Liora squeaked again. Ronan bounded toward her cell, then veered off, spotting the bread crust. He grabbed it and shook it violently. Caden charged over to steal it. They collided near the stool again. The stool rocked dangerously. The pups dropped the bread, now trying to climb on top of each other. Ronan went flying and crashed into the stool leg. The stool tipped. The keys flew through the air and hit the stone floor with a tremendous clatter. The pups jumped, startled, then investigated this new interesting thing. Caden tried to pick the key ring up. It was too heavy. He dropped it, shaking his head. Ronan batted at them with one paw. They jingled. He batted them again, harder. They slid across the floor, away from Liora. No, this way." Liora reached through the bars desperately. The pups wrestled right on top of them, oblivious to Leora's pleas. Then Caden got his paw tangled in the keyring. He panicked and started backing up. The keys dragged along with him, jingling wildly. He backed directly toward Leora's cell. Ronan grabbed the other end of the keyring in his teeth, pulling in the opposite direction. They moved in a chaotic sideways path that slowly brought the keys closer to Liora. Yes, keep going," Liora encouraged. Caden gave a particularly hard yank. Ronan's teeth slipped and he tumbled backward, right toward the cell. The momentum pulled Caden forward, too. Both Pups and the keys ended up in a heap directly in front of Leora's cell. Leora's hands shot through the bars and grabbed the key ring. "Good boys," she breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, you wonderful, silly, perfect boys." The Pups sat down, tongues lolling out, seeming immensely pleased with themselves. Liora fumbled with the key ring, her hands shaking. First key didn't fit. Second key didn't fit. The Pups started grooming each other. Third key. Fourth key. Fifth key. Sixth key. It slid into the lock with a soft click. She turned it. The cell door swung open. Liora dropped to her knees and the Pups immediately swarmed her, climbing into her lap, licking her face. "You saved me," she whispered, gathering them into her arms. Caden made a small, proud yipping sound. Ronan pressed his face into her neck and sighed contentedly. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the ones who save us are the very ones we thought we were protecting. Liora stood on shaking legs and ran. She stumbled through the dungeon corridors, following the torchlight upward. The Pups were heavy, solid little bodies that squirmed occasionally, but they stayed mostly quiet. She pushed through the kitchen door and stopped dead. Marta stood at the work table, a knife in hand. "Liora." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They said you'd been taken to the dungeon." Her gaze dropped to the Pups and her words died. Marta set down the knife. "We need to get you out of here," she said, already moving. She grabbed a canvas pack and began filling it with supplies. "And those Pups need to go to their mother." Marta spread a map across the table, tracing a route north. "I'm loyal to Queen Seraphina. Always have been. She's gathering forces here in the Northern Territories." Marta's voice was firm. "The king is a dangerous man. He'll hurt you. He'll hurt his own sons. But the queen, she'll protect you. Take them. Go north." Leora's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared. Please come with me." Marta's face softened. "I'll stay. Lead them off your scent. Buy you time. But you must hurry." She pressed the map into Leora's hand and helped settle the pack onto her shoulders. A warning bell began to ring somewhere above them. Marta pulled Liora into a tight embrace. "Go," she said. "Be safe." Leora's voice broke. "You're my only family, Marta. I love you." Marta's eyes glistened. She brushed away a tear, then grabbed Leora's arm and pulled her toward a corner of the kitchen. She yanked aside a rug, revealing a trap door in the floor. "There's a passage," Marta said, heaving it open. "It comes out beyond the palace walls. Head northwest into the forest. Don't stop." Footsteps echoed outside, voices shouting. "Thank you," Liora whispered. "For everything." Marta's stern expression cracked. "Go, child." Liora descended into the passage. Marta lowered the trap door, and the last thing Liora saw was her face before darkness swallowed everything. Liora stood in the darkness, clutching 2 wolf pups who had saved her life. "All right," she whispered to them. "Northwest to your mother. To the queen." Liora fled through the dark forest, her heart torn in two. Behind her, somewhere in that palace, was Marta, the only person who'd ever truly loved her. And Liora had left her there. The guilt was a physical weight in her chest, heavy as the pups in her arms and the pack on her back. But she couldn't stop. She had to get the twins to safety. The pups were heavier than she had expected, solid, squirming weight that shifted constantly. The pack dug into her shoulders with every step, but she kept moving. Only when the forest grew dense did Liora finally slow. She fumbled for the map Marta had given her. Northwest. Marta had said northwest, but which direction was? A howl cut through the night, distant but unmistakable. Tracker wolves. The map crumpled in Leora's shaking hands as she shoved it back. No time. She had to run. The pups whimpered as she took off again. She held them tighter and pushed through the undergrowth. Behind her, the howls grew louder. Men's voices now, too. "Faster," she gasped to herself. "Come on, faster." But her legs were already giving out. Her knees shook with each step. Without the map, without any sense of direction, Liora knew she was getting lost. Through the trees ahead, amber eyes gleamed. Liora veered hard left, crashing through a thicket that tore at her clothes. The pups yelped in protest. "Shh," she pleaded breathlessly, but they were frightened now, making distressed sounds that seemed impossibly loud. The snarls were gaining, the thud of paws on earth growing closer until Liora stumbled. She threw herself behind a massive oak tree and sank to the forest floor. This was it. This was as far as she could go. "Shh, little terrors," she whispered, her voice shaking. But the pups were too scared. They whimpered and squirmed, their little bodies trembling. Through the darkness, amber eyes blinked, moved closer. The growls of tracker wolves surrounded them. 3, maybe 4, circling the oak tree. Liora pressed her back against the rough bark. She didn't stand a chance. The pups' whimpers grew louder. They couldn't help it. They were babies, terrified and exhausted. Then a massive shadow moved through the undergrowth. The tracker wolf nearest to Liora turned toward the movement, and a wolf unlike any Liora had ever seen exploded from the darkness. He was huge, easily twice the size of the palace trackers, with a scarred muzzle. He slammed into the first tracker with enough force to send it flying. The attack was savage, merciless. Another tracker leaped onto his back, but he shook it off, sending it crashing into a tree with a sickening crunch. Liora pressed herself harder against the oak, her eyes wide with terror. Palace guards burst through the undergrowth, swords drawn. "Rogue wolf, kill it!" The lone wolf reared up and released a howl that seemed to shake the very trees. The guards stumbled backward, their swords wavering. The lone wolf dropped to all fours and charged. The guards scattered, crashing through the undergrowth. Then there was silence. The tracker wolves were either dead or fled. The guards were gone, and the massive, scarred wolf turned toward Liora's hiding spot, his eyes, pale gold in the moonlight, locked on hers. He took a step forward. Liora bolted. She didn't think, just grabbed the pups tighter and ran. Behind her, she heard a surprised huff, almost like a laugh, and then pause, giving chase. The wolf was faster, but he wasn't attacking. He was just following. Liora spotted a cluster of large boulders and dove for them, wedging herself into a gap. The space was barely big enough, but she squeezed in. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the sound of bones cracking. The distinctive sound of a shift. Liora pressed her hand over her mouth. The pups, exhausted, had finally gone quiet. "Well," a deep male voice said nearby, tinged with amusement. "That's one way to thank someone for saving your life." Liora didn't respond. The voice continued, casual. "Those palace wolves were about to tear you apart, kid. Can't say I've ever been run away from quite so enthusiastically after a rescue." There was rustling fabric. He was getting dressed. "You can come out now," the voice said. "I'm not going to hurt you. If I wanted to, I would have left you to the trackers." Liora stayed frozen. A long sigh. "All right then, let's see." Footsteps circled her hiding spot once, twice, then they stopped directly in front of the gap. A man's face appeared in the opening. He was probably in his 40s, with long, unkempt hair streaked with gray, but his eyes, those pale wolf eyes, were sharp, with something that might have been kindness buried beneath the weariness. "There you are," he said mildly. "What are you doing wedged in there? Can't be comfortable." Liora stared at him, trembling. He studied her. Then his expression softened. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just saved you from trackers who very much wanted to hurt you. Remember?" Liora's voice came out as a croak. "You killed them." The man shrugged. "Some of them," he said it without apology. "They were hunting a child carrying babies. I don't take kindly to that sort of thing." Liora's arms tightened around the twins. The man noticed and huffed a soft laugh. "Easy, Mother Wolf. I'm not going to take them from you." He settled on the ground a few feet away. "I'm Fenris. What's your name?" When Liora didn't answer, he shrugged. "That's all right. But you should probably come out of there. Those guards will regroup eventually. How do I know you're not going to take me back to the palace? Liora asked. Fenris's expression hardened. Because I'd sooner cut off my own arm than help that bastard king with anything. The venom in his voice was real, raw. So slowly, cautiously, Liora began to edge out of her hiding spot. Trust is the hardest thing to give when it's been broken before. But sometimes we have no choice but to take a leap of faith. Liora stared up at Fenris's tall form, her heart hammering. She wanted so desperately to trust him. But trust had gotten her nothing but pain before. You don't like King Aldrich? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Fenris snarled. The king has no honor. I'd rather have no pack than belong to his. Emboldened by his clear hatred of the man, Liora took a chance. She shifted the twins slightly in her arms. They'd drifted off to sleep during her hiding. They're the king's sons, she said, nodding down at them. I need to reunite them with their mother. Her voice broke slightly. Will you? Will you help me? Fenris glanced down at the sleeping boys, then back at Liora. Those are the princes? He asked, stunned. Liora nodded. And they're here alone with a 10-year-old? Fenris asked, dumbfounded. Liora huffed. I'm nearly 13, and I'm all they have. She looked down at the sleeping pups. And they're all I have. Something shifted in Fenris's expression. He groaned, then snatched her map and studied it briefly in the moonlight. I'll walk you to the river crossing, he said gruffly. About half a day's journey from here. But after that, kid, you're on your own. Relief flooded through Liora. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Fenris said, already turning deeper into the forest. We've got a lot of ground to cover before dawn. Can you walk? The river crossing came and went. Fenris didn't leave. The water's too fast here, he'd said, barely pausing. We'll need to go upstream. Another few hours. Those few hours turned into a full day, then another. There's a village near here, Fenris announced on the third morning. Royal sympathizers. We'll need to go around. That'll add another day, maybe 2. By the end of the first week, Fenris still hadn't left them. Liora stopped questioning it. She simply accepted that Fenris was staying, at least for now. The days fell into a rhythm that was almost peaceful. Fenris taught her how to set proper snares. At night, they slept in a formation that felt sacred. Fenris stretched out in his massive wolf form, Liora with her back against his warm flank, and the twin pups curled against her stomach. One morning, Liora watched in horror as Caden discovered a rabbit snare Fenris had set. The little pup approached it cautiously, then pounced. The snare collapsed immediately, and Caden found himself tangled in cord and sticks. He yelped, thrashing. Ronan rushed over to help and promptly got tangled himself. Within seconds, both pups were a yipping, rolling ball of fur and rope. Liora rushed over, but Fenris was already there, kneeling down with surprising patience. His large, scarred hands worked gently through the tangles, freeing one pup, then the other. Easy, little warriors, he murmured. You've conquered the fearsome rope trap. Very impressive. Caden, finally freed, shook himself indignantly and immediately tried to attack the remains of the snare. Fenris's lips twitched. He glanced up at Liora, who was trying hard not to laugh. They're going to destroy every trap I set, aren't they? He asked. Probably, Liora admitted. Fenris sighed. That night, after the twins had fallen asleep, Fenris fed another stick into their fire. We'll reach the foothills tomorrow, he said. After that, it's maybe 3 more days to the Northern Territories. Leora's heart sank. And then, you'll leave. Fenris didn't answer immediately. He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up. I left Aldrich's pack when he banished my brother, he said finally, his voice low. My brother was injured in one of the king's wars, took a wound that never quite healed right. He couldn't shift properly anymore. He shook his head. Aldrich said he was too weak. Liora watched him in the firelight, seeing the pain in his face. I should have left with him that day, Fenris continued. But I stayed, told myself I was a man of honor. A few weeks later, I found my brother dead. He looked up at Liora, his eyes fierce. If I'd left when my brother needed me, he'd still be alive today. Liora's eyes burned. The Alpha King destroys anyone he deems unworthy, Fenris said, his voice rough. But I won't let that happen to you. I won't let any harm come to you or those boys. Liora believed him. The people who have been broken by the same cruelty often recognize each other. There's a kinship in shared pain that creates bonds stronger than blood. Get some sleep, Fenris said. We've got a long walk ahead of us tomorrow. She was just drifting off when the first howl echoed through the trees. Liora's eyes snapped open. Fenris was on his feet instantly. Get behind that tree. Take the pups and the supplies. Stay down. Liora grabbed the pack and scooped up both pups. Through the trees, she could see shadows moving. Tracker wolves, at least 4 of them, and guards with torches and swords. Fenris surged to his feet and launched himself at the first tracker wolf before it could enter their camp. The fight was brutal. One of the guards broke through, heading straight for Liora. Without thinking, Liora kicked the dying embers toward him. The hot coals scattered across his face, and he screamed. Fenris was on him in an instant, driving his branch into the man's chest. The others fled, but then Fenris made a sound. A low groan of pain that sent ice through Liora's veins. She scrambled out from behind the tree. Fenris had fallen to his knees, one hand pressed to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and too much. Liora said, her voice rising. It's not healing. Why isn't it healing? Fenris ground out through clenched teeth. Poisoned. What do we do? Fenris tried to push himself upright and failed. There will be more. They'll have heard the fight. We have to move. You need to rest. It's not safe. He tried again. We keep moving now. Liora stared at him. All right, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. We move, but I'm helping you walk. Fenris gripped her arm and levered himself to his feet. He swayed, and Liora braced herself to take his weight. Together they stumbled forward into the dark forest. They would make it. They had to. They stumbled forward across terrain that had finally flattened, rocky and sparse, but blessedly clear after weeks in the dense forest. Fenris walked beside Liora, leaning heavily on her shoulder. Every step seemed to cost him, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. But they were so close now. She looked up and saw it spread across the wide valley ahead. A massive camp, dozens of canvas tents, cook fires sending black smoke into the gray sky, figures moving with purpose between the structures. An army. Fenris, she said, her voice cracking. I think we're here. Fenris lifted his head with visible effort. They pushed forward one agonizing step at a time. The camp was a hive of activity. Soldiers sharpening weapons, armor smiths hammering at forges, scouts reporting in. No one noticed them at first. Somebody! Liora called out, her voice cracking. Please help! A few soldiers glanced their way, but didn't stop. Please! Liora shouted, putting every ounce of strength she had left into her voice. More heads turned. People started to notice this filthy girl supporting a bleeding man and wolf pups. At that moment, Fenris's legs gave out completely. He collapsed, his weight pulling Liora down with him. They all hit the rocky ground hard. Fenris didn't make a sound, didn't move. Suddenly, people were rushing toward them. Soldiers, camp workers, a woman in healer's robes. The twin pups scrambled to Liora, whining with fear. A woman with gray-streaked hair knelt beside Fenris, turning him onto his back. She glanced at Liora with sharp eyes. What happened, child? She asked. Liora's words tumbled out. We were attacked by King Aldrich's army. Fenris fought them off, but one of the guards had a poisoned blade. The woman examined Fenris's wound, pulling aside his blood-soaked shirt. I need to find the queen, Liora said desperately. The twins need. Someone fetch Her Majesty, the woman called over her shoulder. A soldier sprinted away. What's your name, girl? Liora, she said. I'm Alara. I'm going to help your friend. Soldiers appeared with a canvas stretcher and carefully lifted Fenris onto it. His eyes were closed, his face ashen, but his chest still rose and fell. Meanwhile, Liora glanced at the twin pups. Unusual to shift so young. Liora pulled them closer protectively. They're special. Before Liora could respond, a powerful feminine voice cut through the gathered crowd. "What's the meaning of this?" it asked. The crowd parted. The queen appeared. Liora immediately knew it was her, tall and regal and beautiful even in fighting leathers, her dark hair pulled back in a severe braid. Her eyes swept the scene, then locked on the twin pups pressed against Liora's legs. Recognition and disbelief flashed across her face. Her hand went to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. Then she was running. She dropped to her knees and gathered both wolf pups into her arms. "My babies," she sobbed. "My babies! You've come back to me!" She held them and wept, her whole body shaking. The pups pressed closer, nuzzling against her, their tails wagging slightly. They recognized their mother's scent instantly. The entire camp had gone silent. "Who?" She pulled back, her voice thick with emotion. "Who brought you back to me?" Liora found herself suddenly visible as the queen's gaze locked on her. Her face went absolutely white. "You," she whispered. Fear trickled cold down Liora's spine. "They were lost without you," she hurriedly said. "I tried to keep them safe. I'm sorry if I did something wrong." Serafina reached her and cupped Liora's face in both hands. Her touch was warm, careful. Her eyes were filled with tears. "You brought my sons back to me," Serafina said, her voice trembling. "I tried," Liora managed. Up close, Liora could see the queen's hands shaking, see the way her eyes searched Liora's face with an intensity that bordered on hunger. The queen pulled her into an embrace. Liora went stiff with shock, but the queen held her with the same desperate relief she'd shown her sons. "Thank you," Serafina whispered against Liora's hair. When they pulled apart, Serafina kept both hands on Liora's face. "What's your name, child?" she asked, her voice strained. "Liora." The queen flinched as if the name had struck her. "Liora," she repeated. "How old are you, Liora?" 13, I think." Serafina's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, they were swimming with tears. She pulled Liora close again, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Behind them, Liora called out urgently, "Your Majesty, the wounded man. We need to get him to the healing tent immediately." Serafina pulled back, but kept one hand on Liora's shoulder. "Who is he?" she asked. Liora's voice broke. "Fenris. He helped us, protected us." Fierce determination flashed across Serafina's face. "Take him to my personal healer," she commanded. "Use whatever you need. I want him alive." Liora nodded and followed the soldiers carrying Fenris's stretcher. Serafina turned back to Liora, brushing a strand of dirty hair from her face. "You must be exhausted. When did you last eat? Sleep?" Liora couldn't remember. "I'm fine. The twins are home now." Serafina smiled through her tears. Her hand trembled against Liora's cheek. "And so are you. You're home, too." Liora frowned. All she could think about was Fenris lying pale and still on that stretcher, and the twin pups pressed warm against her sides. They were here. They were safe. And the queen had held Liora like she was something precious. Liora didn't understand any of it. Liora woke to the warmth of two small bodies pressed against her chest. The twin pups were curled together on top of her, their soft breathing steady and peaceful. And sitting in a chair beside the bed was Queen Serafina. Liora's heart jumped. Serafina raised a hand gently. "Easy. You're safe here." Liora settled back against the pillows, her arms instinctively curling around the twins. The queen's expression softened. "Thank you again. I don't think I can ever thank you enough for what you've done." Liora nodded politely, not trusting herself to speak. Serafina studied her face and frowned. "Is something the matter? Are you still hungry? Cold? Do you need anything?" Liora shook her head, looking away. She stroked the pup's soft fur, focusing on the feel of it beneath her fingers rather than the queen's searching gaze. She wanted to ask about Fenris, but she didn't know if she had the right to demand anything from a queen. Seraphina's voice was gentle. "It's all right, child. If there's something you need, you can tell me." Liora hesitated. She'd trusted a king before, built her whole world around his supposed kindness. She wouldn't be that foolish again, but Seraphina reached out slowly, and Liora flinched back before she could stop herself. The queen froze. Her scent changed. Not angry, but sad. Painfully sad. Seraphina withdrew her hand. "I apologize. I didn't mean to startle you." Liora swallowed hard. The queen didn't smell angry. Didn't look threatening. She looked down at the pups worriedly, and the words came out small and frightened. "They haven't shifted back." Seraphina leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" Leora's throat tightened. "Not since we left the castle. They've been pups the whole time, and I don't know why. And Her voice cracked. Tears burned in her eyes. "I should have made them feel safe. I should have done better." Seraphina's voice was firm but not unkind. "Stop. This is not your fault." Liora shook her head. "But I was taking care of them. And they're babies," Seraphina said, her own voice thick with emotion. "Babies who were taken from their home, from everything they knew. Babies need stability, security, familiar surroundings. Of course they were scared. Not even their own mother, a queen with an army, could have prevented that." She paused. "So it is certainly not your fault. Do you understand me?" Liora wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "You were incredibly brave," the queen said. "You saved them. You kept them alive and brought them home when no one else could have." "I am so..." Her voice broke. She whispered, "I am so proud of you." The words settled around Liora like a warm blanket. She didn't understand why the queen looked at her like that, but something in Leora's chest loosened. "May I see Fenris?" Liora asked quietly. "I need to know if he's going to be all right." Surprise flickered across Seraphina's face, but she recovered quickly. "How about you rest for a bit longer? I'll go check how he's doing and ask the healer if you can visit him later." "All right." Despite the tension still coiled in her stomach, Liora found herself nodding. Seraphina stood. "Good. Sleep. You're safe now. I promise." Liora tried to stay awake, but the bed was so soft, and the twins were so warm that sleep pulled her under like a tide. When she woke again, the tent was darker, and Queen Seraphina hadn't returned. Liora carefully extracted herself from beneath the sleeping pups. She had to find Fenris. Had to see for herself that he was all right. Liora slipped out and let her nose guide her. Even without a wolf of her own, she could track Fenris's scent. It led her to a larger tent on the far side of camp. Inside, a soldier sat sleeping near the entrance. Beyond him, rows of cots held injured soldiers, and at the very back, she could see Fenris. He was lying unconscious, his chest bare and bandaged, and beside his cot, bending down to check his wound, was Queen Seraphina. Liora froze. Suddenly, Fenris's eyes snapped open. His hand shot out, and he pressed a knife against Seraphina's throat. "Where are the kids?" he growled. Seraphina didn't flinch. She reached up slowly and gently removed his hand from her throat. "They're safe. Sleeping," she said calmly. She helped ease Fenris back down as he blinked at her, clarity slowly returning to his eyes. "You're the queen," Fenris sighed. "The twins' mother." Seraphina nodded. Fenris stared at her for a long moment, his brow furrowing. Have we met before?" he asked. "No, I don't think so." "Why?" "Your scent. It seems familiar somehow," Fenris said, sounding confused. Then he seemed to remember himself. That he was lying in bed, having just held a knife to a queen's throat. "I apologize," he began. "I didn't mean to." "No apologies necessary," Seraphina interrupted. "You were protecting my children, even unconscious." She paused. "I owe you a great debt, sir, for bringing them all back to me." Fenris shrugged uncomfortably. "It was all Liora. She got them out of the palace. She kept them safe. She's one brave kid." Seraphina tensed visibly at his words, though her expression remained neutral. "Yes," she nodded. "She is." Fenris studied the queen's face. "What are you planning to do with her?" he asked. "What do you mean?" Fenris pushed himself up to sitting despite the obvious pain it caused. "She brought you back your pups. Great. Happy for you. But now, what's going to happen to her?" Leora's breath caught. She pressed herself closer to the tent wall, her heart hammering. "I don't plan to send her back to the king if that's what you're wondering," Seraphina said. "Glad to hear it, sweetheart," Fenris snapped. "But there is a world of difference between not being sent to her death and being properly taken care of. She's just a kid. She'll be needing guidance." "Guidance?" Seraphina repeated. "You know what I mean." Fenris met her eyes. "Someone to look out for her, care for her. I assure you the child will be well taken care of," Seraphina said, looking away. Fenris sighed. "Right, but the kid's been through a lot. It's not just about giving her food and shelter." "What are you saying?" Seraphina asked quietly. "I could take her." Fenris met her eyes again. "Take care of her. I'll do it." Leora's hand flew to her mouth, holding back a gasp. "You'd do that?" Seraphina asked, sounding genuinely touched. Fenris shifted uncomfortably. "Well, somebody has to. Might as well be me." Seraphina was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "That's very kind of you to offer," she said. "Truly. But it's one I cannot accept. Liora will stay here with me." "Why?" Fenris frowned. "Did you even ask her if she—" "Because she is mine," Seraphina interrupted. Fenris just gaped at her. "Liora is my daughter," Seraphina continued. From her hiding spot, Liora felt the world tilt sideways. You're serious, aren't you?" Fenris stammered. "You said yourself my scent reminded you of someone," Seraphina pointed out quietly. Fenris's eyes widened as realization crashed over him. "You're saying Liora is a princess, and that is why you smell like her?" "Yes," Seraphina confirmed. "A princess and King Aldrich's firstborn child and heir, one he rejected the moment he discovered she couldn't shift." Liora staggered backward, her hand pressed to the tent wall for support. The king who she'd idolized. He was her father. When Liora was born without a wolf, it didn't matter to me. "I loved her," Seraphina said. "She was beautiful. Mine. But Aldrich—" Her voice hardened. "Aldrich was furious. He demanded that our daughter be killed. Said she was defective. An embarrassment. Liora couldn't breathe. I begged him for her life." Seraphina continued. "I said I would try to give him full shifter pups. Would keep trying, but only if he let her live." "And he agreed?" Fenris asked. "Yes." Seraphina's voice cracked. "But to keep me compliant, he took her from me. Liora, my baby." Fresh tears ran down her face. "I wasn't allowed to hold her or nurse her, or even see her. Not until I gave him his heir. His proper heir," the queen explained through her tears. "I was a prisoner in my own palace for 12 years, endured miscarriage after miscarriage, all while my daughter lived floors below me, and I couldn't even speak to her." Fenris cursed. "Bastard. That absolute bastard. But it wasn't enough," Seraphina said, her voice hollow. "When the twins were born, when I'd finally given him what he wanted, he still wouldn't let me see her. I realized then that he never intended to keep his word. That Elodie—" She paused and took a breath and corrected herself. "That Liora wasn't safe. That none of my children were safe. So I tried to escape with all 3 of them. I was caught." Seraphina's voice was flat. "Aldrich had me arrested for treason, was going to execute me in front of the entire court. But those loyal to me, servants like Marta, they helped me escape." Leora's heart lurched at Marta's name. "I fled to my family, my old pack," Seraphina finished. "Gathered an army, declared war. Not for the throne. I don't give a damn about the throne. But for my children." Silence fell. Liora stumbled backward, her hand falling from the tent wall, and turned to run, but she only made it a few steps before a hand caught her shoulder gently. "Liora?" She turned. Seraphina stood there, tears streaming down her face. Their eyes met. "Is it true?" Liora asked. Seraphina nodded, and Liora began to cry, great heaving sobs that tore from her chest. "You have to keep fighting," she said. "You have to stop him. For Marta, for everyone he's hurt." "I will," Seraphina swore. "I promise." Liora threw herself into her arms. The queen caught her, holding her close, and they both wept. For the years they'd lost, for the cruelty they'd endured, for Marta's sacrifice, for everything that had been stolen from them, but also for the impossible fact that despite everything, they'd found each other again. Sometimes the truth we've been searching for was hidden in plain sight all along. Sometimes the family we've been longing for was always there, just waiting for the right moment to find us. Fenris's recovery was slow but steady, and Liora visited him every day. At first, she'd come alone, slipping into the healing tent to sit beside his cot and tell him stories about the twins. But as the days passed, she noticed she wasn't always his only visitor. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the canvas walls amber, Liora approached the healing tent to find Seraphina already there. The queen sat beside Fenris's cot, sleeves rolled up, carefully unwrapping the bandages around his torso. Fenris was watching her face with an expression Liora had never seen on him before. "You're terrible at following orders, you know that?" His voice was teasing. Seraphina said something too quiet for Liora to hear, and Fenris huffed a laugh that made him wince. "Pretty sure I told you to stop fussing and let the healers do their job," he said. "And I'm pretty sure I told you to stop being so stubborn." Fenris caught her wrist gently. "I'm serious, Your Highness. You don't need to. I want to." Their eyes met and held, the air between them thickening with something warm and weighted. Liora felt suddenly like an intruder. A smile tugged at her lips as she turned away. She found the twins exactly where she'd left them. 2 wolf pups sprawled on a blanket outside Seraphina's tent, playing with carved wooden animals. They'd finally shifted back to their human forms a week after arriving at camp. Liora had woken to find 2 small boys instead of pups, and she'd nearly cried with relief. Now they switched back and forth constantly, as if making up for lost time. Ronan spotted a butterfly landing on a nearby flower and pointed his nose at it urgently. "Yes, I see it," Liora said. "It's very pretty, but you have to be gentle." "Too late." Ronan bounded after it. Caden gave chase. Within seconds, both pups were tumbling through the grass, yipping excitedly. Liora laughed and lay back on the blanket, letting the last warmth of the sun wash over her face. Above her, the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. She heard footsteps and opened her eyes to find Seraphina standing over her, silhouetted against the sunset. "How is Fenris?" Liora asked. "Healing well." There was something soft in Seraphina's eyes, stubborn as ever, but healing. They sat together in comfortable silence. Eventually, both pups tired themselves out and trotted back. Ronan curled up in Seraphina's lap, and Caden flopped against Leora's side with a dramatic sigh. As darkness settled and the stars wheeled overhead, Fenris made his way slowly from the healing tent. He settled himself on the grass beside the blanket with a low groan. "Should you be up?" Liora asked. "Should you be mothering me?" Fenris countered. Caden yipped happily and scrambled over to climb into his lap. Fenris winced but helped the pup, settling him carefully against his chest. "You're getting heavy, little warrior." Ronan lifted his head from Seraphina's lap and whined softly. "I stay with your mother," Fenris said. "There's not enough lap for both of you." Liora watched them exchange a look over the pups' heads, something warm and knowing passing between them. Then Seraphina smiled at Liora. "They love you," she said, looking at the twins. "They trusted you when they couldn't trust anyone else." "Because I smelled like you," Liora said, her voice thick. "Because you are their sister," Seraphina corrected gently. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks spiraling into the star-filled sky. Liora looked at her small, fierce family. Seraphina beside her, Ronan sleeping in her lap, Fenris with Caden curled against his chest. Tomorrow would bring more preparations for war. King Aldrich wouldn't surrender easily. There would be battles ahead, losses, moments of doubt, but they would face them together. And tonight, for this one perfect moment, they were just a family. What Liora learned on her journey is something we could all stand to remember. That our worth isn't determined by what we lack or what others say about us. That family isn't just blood, it's the people who choose us and who we choose in return. And that sometimes the darkest moments of our lives are just the beginning of something beautiful we never could have imagined. If you're going through something difficult right now, if you feel unseen or undervalued, remember Liora's story. Remember that your circumstances don't define you, and remember that sometimes the people who will love you most are still out there, waiting to find you. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. I tried something new this time by adding a bit of background music to the introduction, and I'd really love your feedback. Did you enjoy it? Or did it distract you from the story itself? Let me know what you think in the comments. And, as always, if you'd like more, feel free to check out my Patreon for extra content, bonus chapters, and exclusive stories. The link is in the description. Much love, Lily.